If you're thinking of a city that effortlessly marries old world charm with contemporary vitality, where every corner exudes culture, art, and a sense of refinement, you're likely thinking about the place we're building today. Hello everyone, this is City Builder, and today we're building Vienna. We are going to start our build with an island that is created between Danube Channel and the river itself. It consists of two city districts, Brigitteno at the north and Leopoldstadt at the south. And while the first one isn't considered historical due to the most part of Brigitteno, was formed after a good tract of land secured by the regulation of the river in years 1870-1875. The Leopoldstadt is home to the Prater Park, which once was a beloved place for an emperors to hunt and now is a big public park. And now, as we beginning to recreate this amazing city, let's talk about its history for a bit. The history of Vienna has been long and varied, beginning when the Roman Empire created a military camp in the area now covered by Vienna's city center. From that humble beginning, Vienna grew from the Roman settlement known as Vindobona to be an important trading site in the 11th century. It became the capital of the Babenberg dynasty and subsequently of the Austrian Habsburgs, under whom it became one of Europe's cultural hubs. During the 19th century, as the capital of the Austrian Empire and later Austria-Hungary, it temporarily became one of Europe's biggest cities. Since the end of the First World War, Vienna has been the capital of the Republic of Austria. The name Vindobona derives from a Celtic language, suggesting that the region must have been inhabited before Roman times. The Romans created a military camp occupied Bellagio ex Gemina during the 1st century on the site of the city center of present-day Vienna. The settlement was raised to the status of a municipium in 212. Even today, the streets of the first district show where the encampment placed its walls and moats. The Romans stayed until the 5th century. Roman Vindobona was located in the outskirts of the empire and thus fell prey to the chaos of the migration period. There are some indications that a catastrophic fire occurred around the beginning of the 5th century. However, the remains of the encampment were not deserted, and a small settlement remained. The streets and houses of early medieval Vienna followed the former Roman walls, which gives rise to the conclusion that parts of the fortification were still in place and used by the settlers. Byzantine copper coins from the 6th century have been found several times in the area of today's city center, indicating considerable trade activity. Graves from the 6th century were found during excavations next to the Berghof in an area around Salvatorgas. At that time, the Lombards controlled the area, with Slavs and Avars following later. Early Vienna was centered on the Berghof. The first documented mention of the city during the Middle Ages is within the Salzburg Annals, dating to 881, when a battle apud Veniam was fought against the Magyars. However, it is unclear whether this refers to the city or the River Wye. In the year 976, the Margraviate of Österreich was given to the Babenberg family. Vienna lay at its border with Hungary. Vienna was an important site of trade as early as the 11th century. In the exchange of Mautern between the Bishop of Passau and Margrave Leopold IV, Vienna is mentioned as a civitas for the first time, which indicates the existence of a well-ordered settlement. In 1155, Margrave Henry II of Austria made Vienna his capital. In 1156, Austria was raised to a duchy in the Privilegium Minus, with Vienna becoming the seat of all future dukes. During that time, the Schottenstift was founded. The events surrounding the Third Crusade, during which King Richard the Lionheart was discovered and captured by Duke Leopold. The fifth of virtuous 2 days before Christmas of 1192, in Erdberg near Vienna, brought an enormous ransom of 50,000 silver marks, is about 10 to 12 tons of silver, about a third of the emperor's claims against the English. Richard had been extradited to him in March 1193. This allowed the creation of a mint and the construction of city walls around the year 1200. At the U-Bahn station Stubentor, some remains of the city walls can still be seen today. Because he had abused a protected crusader, Leopold V was excommunicated by Pope Celestine III and died without having been absolved after falling from a horse in a tournament. However, it was considered embarrassing that Vienna did not have its own bishop. It is known that Duke Frederick II negotiated about the creation of a bishopric in Vienna, and the same is suspected of Ottokar Przemysl. In 1278, Rudolf I took control over the Austrian lands after his victory over Ottokar II of Bohemia and began to establish Habsburg rule. In Vienna, it took a relatively long time for the Habsburgs to establish their control, because partisans of Ottokar remained strong for a long time. There were several uprisings against Albert I. The family of the Paltrums von Stephansfriedhof was foremost among the insurgents. In 1280, John Staranickel wrote the Fürstenbuch, a first history of the city. With the Luxembourg emperors, Prague became the imperial residence and Vienna stood in its shadow. The early Habsburgs attempted to extend it in order to keep up. Duke Albert II, for example, had the Gothic choir of the Stephansdom. In 1327, Frederick the Handsome published his edict allowing the city to maintain an Eisenbuch iron book, listing its privileges. A combination of the heraldic eagle with the city coat of arms showing a white cross in a red field is found on a seal dated 1327. This heraldic emblem was in use throughout the 14th century in different variants. Rudolf IV of Austria deserves credit for his prudent economic policy, which raised the level of prosperity. His epithet, the founder, is due to two things. First, he founded the University of Vienna in 1365, and second, he began the construction of the Gothic nave in the Stephansdom. The latter is connected to the creation of a metropolitan chapter as a symbolic substitute for a bishop. There was a period of inheritance, disputes among the Habsburgs resulting not only in confusion but also in an economic decline and social unrest, with disputes between the parties of patricians and artisans. While the patricians supported Ernest the Iron, the artisans supported Leopold IV. In 1408, the mayor Konrad Vorloff, an exponent of the patrician party, was executed. After the election of Duke Albert V as German King Albert II, Vienna became the capital of the Holy Roman Empire. Eventually, in 1469, Vienna was given its own bishop, and the Stephansdom became a cathedral. During the upheavals of the era of Emperor Frederick III, Vienna remained on the side of his opponents, first Albert VI, then Matthias Corvinus, as Frederick proved unable to maintain peace in the land vis-à-vis rampaging gangs of mercenaries, often remaining from the Hussite Wars. In 1485, the Hungarian King Matthias Corvinus and the Black Army of Hungary conquered the city, and Vienna became the king's seat that served as the capital of Hungary until 1490. In 1522, under Ferdinand I, Holy Roman Emperor, the blood judgment of Wiener, Neustadt led to the execution of leading members of the opposition within the city and thus a destruction of the political structures. From then on, the city stood under direct imperial control. In 1556, Vienna became the seat of the emperor, with Bohemia having been added to the Habsburg realm in 1526. During this time, the city was also re-Catholicized after having become Protestant rather quickly. In 1551, the Jesuits were brought to town and soon gained a large influence in court. The leader of the Counter-Reformation here was Melchior Kleisel, Bishop of Vienna from 1600. In 1529, Vienna was besieged by the Ottoman Turks for the first time under the First Turkish Siege. Although unsuccessfully, the city, protected by medieval walls, only barely withstood the attacks until epidemics and an early winter forced the Turks to retreat. The siege had shown that new fortifications were needed. Following plans by Sebastian Schronz, Vienna was expanded to a fortress in 1548. The city was furnished with 11 bastions and surrounded by a moat. A glacis was created around Vienna, a broad strip without any buildings, which allowed defenders to fire freely at these fortifications, which accounted for the major part of building activities well into the 17th century, became decisive in the Second Turkish Siege of 1683, as they allowed the city to maintain itself for 2 months, until the Turkish army was defeated by the army led by the Polish King John III Sobieski. This was the turning point in the Turkish Wars, as the Ottoman Empire was pushed back more and more during the following decades. The following period was characterized by extensive building activities. In the course of reconstruction, Vienna was largely turned into a Baroque city. The most important architects were Johann Bernhard Fischer von Erlach and Johann Lucas von Hildebrand. Most construction happened in the suburbs Vorstadt, as the nobility began to cover the surrounding land with garden palaces, known as palais. The best known are the Palais Liegenstein, Palais IE Modena, Schönbrunn Palace, Palais Schwarzenberg, and the Belvedere Garden Palace of Prince Eugene of Savoy. In 1704, an outer fortification, the Linien Wall, was built around the Vorstadt. After the extensive plague epidemics of 1679 and 1713, the population began to grow steadily. It is estimated that 150,000 people lived in Vienna in 1724 and 200,000 in 1790. At that time, the first factories were built, starting in Leopoldstadt. Hygienic problems began to become noticeable. Sewers and street cleaning began to develop. Also in this time, the first house numbers, Tonskriptionsnummern, were issued, and the government postal system began to develop. Under Emperor Joseph II, the city administration was modernized in 1783. Officials in charge of only the city were introduced, and the magistrate was created. At the same time, the graveyards within the city were closed. During the Napoleonic Wars, Vienna was taken by the French twice, in 1805 and 1809. The first conquest happened without a battle. 3 French marshals crossed the strongly defended Tabor Bridge, the only Danube bridge at that time, and convinced the Austrian commander that the war was already over. In the meantime, the French army easily entered the city and was greeted by the population with interest rather than rejection. Napoleon allowed 10,000 men of the Vienna National Guard to remain armed and left the arsenal to them when he left, as complete as he had found it. However, the second occupation happened only after heavy fire. Shortly after, Napoleon suffered his first large defeat at Aspern nearby. Less than 2 months later, his army crossed the Danube again and fought the Battle of Wagram on the same terrain as the previous Battle of Aspern. This second battle resulted in a victory for the French, and Austria soon surrendered, ending the War of the Fifth Coalition. In 1810, Salomon Mayer Rothschild arrived in Vienna from Frankfurt and sets up a bank named Mayer von Rothschild and Sohn. The Emperor of Austria in 1823 made the 5 Rothschild brothers barons. The Rothschild family became famous as bankers in the major countries of Europe, and the Rothschild banking family of Austria remained prominent until the Creditanstalt Bank in Vienna was confiscated by the Nazis in 1938. After Napoleon's final defeat, the Congress of Vienna took place from September 18, 1814 to June 9, 1815, in which the political map of Europe was redrawn. The Congress members indulged in many social events, which induced the witty Charles Joseph, Prince de Ligne, to famously say, "Le Congrès danse beaucoup." My dos on the Marseillais Congress dances, but does not progress. The events cost Austria a great deal of money, which was reflected in mockery about the major participants. Alexander of Russia loves for all, Frederick William of Prussia thinks for all, Frederick of Denmark speaks for all, Maximilian of Bavaria drinks for all, Frederick of Württemberg eats for all, Emperor Francis of Austria pays for all. The first half of the 19th century was characterized by intensive industrialization, with Vienna being the center of the railway network after 1837. The French February Revolution of 1848 had an effect as far away as Vienna. On March 13, the March Revolution, which forced long-serving Chancellor Metternich to resign. During the 19th century, Vienna, along with Budapest, became one of the main centers of the Romanian diaspora. The Romanian population of these cities stands out for one of the first ones to develop a strictly Romanian identity. And now let's talk more about Leopoldstadt as we finish building it. This district has a big green area at the east, which is the Prater Park. It's home to an amusement park and the biggest stadium in Austria, where the Euro 2008 Football Cup final match was played. The district was also a home to the theater of the Leopoldstadt. Opened in 1845 and destroyed by fire in 1848, it was the largest dance hall in Vienna at that time, with room for several thousand persons. As a traditional theater district, Leopoldstadt had, in the middle of the 20th century, numerous cinemas, as a result of the spread of television in Austria from the late 1950s. Cinemas began to close in the 1960s, by which the second district was severely affected. And now we begin to build the city center area. It has 8 city districts and is a core of the city. We are going to start with Landstrasse district and then we'll move on to the west. This part of land was included in Vienna's territory as the city was expanded in 1850, mostly to include the area within the city walls. The Vorstadt thus became the 2nd to 9th districts, with the Old City becoming the first. In 1858, the fortifications were demolished and the broad Ringstrasse Boulevard was built in their place. Many monumental buildings were built alongside it. The Ringstrasse style historicism characterizes the architecture of Vienna to this day. The period peaked in the World Exhibition of 1873, immediately before the stock market crash, which ended the Foundation era. In 1861, the Liberals won the first relatively free elections after the end of neo-absolutism. After the Great Flood of 1830, regulation of the Danube was frequently considered. It was finally put into practice during the 1860s. The many branches of the Danube were removed, and a straight course was created away from the city center. The branch near the central city was made narrower, and has been known under the somewhat misleading name Danube Canal ever since. During that period, the population of Vienna increased sharply, mostly because of immigration. Censuses were conducted regularly from 1869 onwards, which showed an all-time high of population in 1910 with 2,031,000 inhabitants. Around 1900, Vienna became a center of the Jugendstil Art Nouveau, most of all with Otto Wagner and the association of artists known as Vienna Secession, after which the characteristic building on Karlsplatz is named. In 1890, the city was expanded for a second time. The Avoroth suburbs beyond the old Linien Wall were incorporated into the town as the districts 11 to 19. The 10th district had been created in 1874 by the division of the 4th. Leopoldstadt was divided in 1900, with the northern part becoming the 20th district, Regitna. In 1904, Floridsdorf became part of Vienna as 21st district. The First World War did not result in an immediate threat to Vienna, but it led to a lack of supplies because of the economic embargo imposed by the Entente powers, which resulted in a shortage of food and clothes. Skyrocketing cost of the war, mostly financed by borrowing, resulted in tremendous inflation that, as in Germany, wiped out the savings of many middle-class Viennese. One interesting quirk is that the 1916 rent control was never officially repealed. Even today, there are buildings where the 1916 rent, by now essentially meaningless. These food shortages led to the 1918 Austro-Hungarian January strike, which started in Vienna. The Bolshevik seizure of power in Russia in November 1917 inspired the youth wing of the Social Democratic Workers' Party of Austria to organize meetings in November 1917 opposing the war. A flight over Vienna, propaganda flight, an air raid inspired by Gabriele D'Annunzio, was carried out on August 9, 1918, with 11 Ansaldo Svab. He flew undisturbed for over 1,200 km in a round trip to Vienna to drop about 400,000 propaganda leaflets written in Italian and German, asking the people of Vienna the end of the alliance between Austria-Hungary and Prussia. The end of the war was also the end of Austria-Hungary. On November 12, 1918, the Republic of Deutsche Österreich, or German Austria, was proclaimed in front of the parliament. The population was concentrated in the capital, which was often called a hydrocephalus because of this. Articles in the international press had doubts about the viability of Vienna as a major European metropolis after the dissolution of Austria-Hungary. In 1921, Vienna was separated from surrounding Lower Austria and became a state of its own, with the mayor now equivalent in rank to a state governor. However, it remained the nominal capital of Lower Austria until 1986. The left-wing Social Democrats, who had dominated since the end of the war, were now in charge of the city administration. Red Vienna was considered an international model. Many notable Gemeindebauteams low-cost residential estates were built during that period. However, the increasing economic difficulties resulted in a political radicalization and polarization of the political parties. On the Social Democratic side, the left-wing Republikanische Schutzbund, Republican Protective Alliance, was formed in 1923-24, which was a well-organized and well-equipped paramilitary group. It was opposed by the right-wing Heimwehrmuseum Guard, which had been formed after the end of the war from local guards and similar combat units. In May 1923, in the presence of President Michael Hainisch, the First World Congress of Jewish Women was inaugurated at the Hofburg. The fire of the Palace of Justice in 1927, after violent demonstrations, the collapse of the Creditanstalt, the largest bank of the country, and finally the dissolution of Parliament in 1933, marked the way to the Civil War in February 1934, after Engelbert Dollfuss, who had been Chancellor of Austria and Foreign Minister since 1932, had forbidden the Nazi Party, the Communist Party, and the Schutzbund in 1933. He extended the ban to the Social Democratic Party in 1934 after the February uprising. The only legal political organization was the new movement of his own creation, the Vaterländische Front. Dollfuss created an authoritarian regime called Standesstaat and ruled without parliamentary approval. In March 1938, Nazi Germany occupied and annexed Austria in a process known as the Anschluss. Adolf Hitler was rapturously received in Vienna by large crowds of admirers and famously gave a speech at Heldenplatz in which he welcomed his homeland into the Reich. Hitler's anti-Jewish policies fell on fertile soil in Vienna, where latent anti-Semitism had increased during the early 20th century. Immediately after the Anschluss, the Jews of Vienna were subject to violence from the state as well as from anti-Semites acting out of their own sadism. During the Reichskristallnacht on November 9, 1938, the synagogues, the Jewish centers of not only religious but also social life, were destroyed. In August, the Kaiser-Oberlandesdorf Wien Central Office for Jewish Emigration was created. Its head was Adolf Eichmann. On the whole, and despite some instances of anti-Semitism, the city of Vienna was less supportive of the Nazi regime than was the rest of Austria. This, however, did not reach any extent of an organized resistance. Hitler himself hated Vienna and was determined to build up Linz, his childhood hometown, and relegate Vienna to backwater status. In the course of the expansion of the city in 1938, 91 adjoining municipalities were incorporated into the city, from which the 22nd Dorf, the 23rd Schwechat, the 24th Modeling, the 25th Lessing, and the 26th Klosterneuburg districts were created, with an area of 1224 square kilometers. This made Vienna the city with the largest territory in the Third Reich. During the war, the city housed 12 subcamps of the infamous Mauthausen-Gusen concentration camp, located in various parts of the city. Although originally out of range of Allied bombers operating from England, by 1943, the city began being attacked by bombers based in Italy. As in other major cities of Nazi Germany, large flak towers were constructed in Vienna as defensive structures against these bombers. So these structures remain in place today, as they are so thick and their foundations so deep that to destroy them would damage surrounding buildings. The US bombings of 1944 and 1945 and the vicious fighting during the subsequent conquest of Vienna by Soviet troops in April 1945 caused much destruction within the city. However, some historic buildings survived the bombardment. Many more were reconstructed after the war. Only a few days after the war, a provisional city government and administration was created. Also, the political parties were recreated. On April 29, 1945, the Parliament building passed from the occupation force to the new Austrian government, and Karl Renner announced the reinstitution of the Democratic Republic of Austria. Vienna was divided into 5 occupation zones between the Soviet Union, the United States, the UK, France, and with the 1st District city center being patrolled by all 4. The first municipal elections were held in November 1945. Of the 100 seats in the municipal council, the left-wing Social Democratic Party captured 58, the right-wing Austrian People's Party 36, and the Communists 6. In 1946, it was decided that the expansion of city territory of 1938 should be reversed, but this law was delayed by a veto of the occupying powers and was not put into practice until 1954. 2 districts remained with Vienna, namely the 22nd one Donnerstadt, north of the Danube, and the 23rd one. In the south, some other districts gained some lower Austrian territory. By May 15, 1955, the country regained its political independence and sovereignty with the Austrian State Treaty. The Austrian Parliament immediately amended the treaty to establish Austria's future neutrality and non-alignment similar to that of Switzerland. This peace treaty was called a state treaty because Austria had temporarily ceased to exist in 1938. After the devastation of the war, Vienna underwent a period of intense reconstruction. The city's infrastructure, including buildings, roads, and bridges, had to be rebuilt. The Allies' presence also brought aid and assistance in the form of the Marshall Plan, which aided Austria's recovery efforts. As the city gradually recovered, there was a focus on preserving its historical architecture and cultural heritage while modernizing to meet the demands of the post-war era. After the war, Vienna experienced rapid economic recovery and modernization. The city gradually transformed into a center of culture, art, and music, continuing its historical legacy. It regained its status as a global hub for classical music and opera. Vienna's rich cultural legacy continued to flourish after the war. The city remained a hub for art, literature, music, and intellectual discourse. The Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra and the Vienna State Opera continued to thrive, attracting artists and performers from around the world. The 20th century also saw the rise of modern and contemporary art movements, contributing to Vienna's reputation as a center of creativity and innovation. Throughout the Cold War, Vienna served as a significant venue for diplomatic negotiations between the East and West. Notably, the city hosted the famous summit meeting between U.S. President John F. Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev in 1961, during which the leaders discussed their differences and the tense situation of the era. Vienna's role as a diplomatic center was reinforced through the establishment of various international organizations and diplomatic missions. Beyond the United Nations, organizations like the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries (OPEC) set up headquarters in the city. These institutions not only facilitated international cooperation, but also brought a diverse range of professionals and experts to Vienna. Public transport in Vienna was improved by the introduction of the new U-Bahn network, the first part of which was opened in 1978. In 1979, the Second Strategic Arms Limitation Talks Treaty was signed in Vienna. During the 1970s, Vienna became the third official seat of the United Nations, and the UNO city was built. At the end of the 20th century, a skyline consisting of several skyscrapers was created with, among others, the Andromeda Tower and Millennium Tower on the left and right sides of the Danube. Furthermore, a complex of skyscrapers was planned at the site of the Wien-Mitte railway station, which might have endangered the position of Vienna's center as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The project has since been redesigned. After the end of the Cold War, Vienna continued to evolve as a cosmopolitan city. It attracted international organizations, multinational corporations, and a diverse expatriate population. The city's role as a diplomatic hub and its rich cultural heritage remained important aspects of its identity. In 1995, Austria joined the European Union. This marked another step in Vienna's integration into the broader European community, fostering economic and political ties with other European countries. Austria's accession to the European Union marked a significant milestone for Vienna and the country as a whole. The EU membership opened up new opportunities for economic growth, trade, and cultural exchange. Vienna's status as a global city was enhanced as it became an important node within the larger European network. Vienna has faced challenges and opportunities in the 21st century, including issues related to urban development, immigration, and the changing global political landscape. The city remains a vibrant metropolis known for its quality of life, cultural offerings, and historical significance. In recent years, Vienna has experienced urban renewal and modernization while striving to maintain its historic charm. The city has focused on sustainable urban planning, public transportation, and environmental initiatives. Additionally, the influx of immigrants and refugees in the 21st century has posed challenges related to integration and social cohesion, prompting the city to develop inclusive policies and programs. Vienna consistently ranks highly in global quality of life indices due to its well-developed infrastructure, healthcare, education, and cultural amenities. The city's blend of historical grandeur and contemporary vibrancy continues to attract residents, tourists, and businesses. It remains a sought-after destination for international travelers, students, and professionals.